I am going to start this episode by naming something openly and honestly. Leveled texts is one of the most controversial topics and distinctions between structured literacy and balanced, comprehensive, and responsive literacy. Pretending that tension does not exist doesn't serve anyone well. So I'm here surrounded by leveled texts intentionally because I believe context matters. For decades, thousands of schools, both nationally and internationally, have filled book rooms with leveled texts to be used as tools for instruction for teachers. If we think about the gradual release of responsibility, the idea comes from interactive read aloud being that highest level of support. Shared reading is that next level of support, that we do it piece with complex text that might be above a child's particular reading level. Leveled texts used with small groups is that you do it piece, but with my support level of gradual release of responsibility. That's the idea of where leveled text fits in this leveled gradual release of responsibilities. Teachers have used them widely. I have used them for years to personally teach hundreds of kids to read. Children love them and have learned from them. I'm not here to convince anyone. I'm just here to slow down long enough to really see multiple viewpoints. It's helpful for me to understand, it's helpful for all of us to understand the viewpoints of both structured literacy and balanced, comprehensive, responsive literacy. Why leveled texts are valued, why they're maybe not valued, where do they fit, and where do they not fit? So I'm not here to defend or dismantle the idea of using leveled texts. It's important for us to hold this complex topic with an open mind and respect new understandings that might emerge as we think about where both methods value and put their energy and put their thinking and put their understandings. So what our common goal is to best serve kids. And we're just going to take a look at where might leveled texts fit in that process.
Okay, let's provide some contexts. So, leveled text are most often used during small group instruction, where teachers work with a few students at a time that is to provide targeted support. So, in these moments, the teacher selects texts intentionally based on what students currently need as readers. Those decisions are informed by data. They're informed by close observation of word solving behaviors, of fluency, monitoring for meaning, of comprehension. And the goal is not to match students to a number or a level, but to choose a text that allows them to practice strategies and skills with just the right amount of challenge. So, leveled texts are written about topics or characters, and they have storylines that strongly appeal to children, and they do span a wide range. So, from kindergarten through eighth grade. Because of this variety, teachers can offer students multiple reading opportunities and use different texts to support growth while we try to keep the kids engaged and motivated based on the interesting stories or characters. An added benefit is that students have access to the texts to service all of the readers that they might have in their classroom, because we know that classrooms have such a range. We have readers that are at grade level, below grade level, and above grade level. And so this range of levels can be matched and used with all of our students. The texts are not intended to replace complex grade level reading experiences. Instead, they serve as a different instructional purpose. So, leveled text meets students where they are as readers. They create a space to develop accuracy and fluency and strategic thinking while independence is developing. So, within the gradual release of responsibility model, this is the you do it, but with my support phase. The teacher is standing by and helping the students, but the students take the lead in the reading while the teacher listens in and prompts and provides support as needed. So the work belongs to the student, but the safety net of instruction remains in place because the teacher is still right there. So, when used intentionally, leveled texts provide a space for practice, for confidence building, for growth. They support readers as they move towards greater independence while still honoring the fact that learning to read is complex. Okay, let's provide some contexts. So, leveled texts are most often used during small group instruction, where teachers work with a few students at a time that is to provide targeted support. So, in these moments, the teacher selects texts intentionally based on what students currently. In Module 4 of the Ohio Department of Education Workforce's Science of Reading Pathway A certification, called Access to Rigorous Grade Level and Complex Texts, educators are reintroduced to the triangular visual shown on the top left of your screen. This visual outlines the dimensions used to determine text complexity. So, the Ohio Department of Education emphasizes that decisions about text complexity should be grounded in a combination of three dimensions, working together rather than in isolation. So, one dimension that you see there is qualitative complexity, which includes meaning and text structure and language. And the knowledge demands a text places on a reader. Okay. So, the second piece that you see there in the triangle is quantitative complexity. And that's often represented through readability measures, such as Lexile, which analyzes features like sentence length and word frequency. The third dimension that you see in that triangle is reader and task. And these are considerations that account for the specific student, for an instructional purpose, for the demands of the task at hand. So, within the framework, structured literacy is very explicit in clarifying that engaging with complex text does not mean relying on leveled instruction through leveled readers. Instead, they say complexity is understood through thoughtful analysis of texts, intentional instructional support, and careful consideration of how students are invited to engage with meaning. So, this guidance invites educators to slow down and think critically about how texts are selected and used, ensuring that access to complexity is still there while remaining responsive to learners and instructional goals. So, here in Ohio, it's important to ground this conversation in the system we're actually working within. So, in Ohio, along with a lot of other states, maintain an approved list of universal screening and diagnostic assessments that districts are required to select from. So I'm intentionally not naming specific assessments or publishers here because of this point of this conversation isn't the tools themselves. It's how we make sense of the data that these assessments provide and how we use that data instructionally. So all three of the approved assessments for Ohio and in many other states report Lexile measures for students. So, in addition to Lexile, they also provide educators with other valuable information, so such as how they grow over time. They provide performance across reading domains. They provide instructional recommendations and data related to comprehension or vocabulary or foundational skills. This information supports screening, it supports progress monitoring, and it supports MTSS decision making. So, for our purposes related to exploring leveled text, I want to narrow our focus. So, when conversations turn to leveled text, Lexile is often the data point that rises to the surface because it's the shared quantitative measure across these state approved assessments. So rather than debating the assessments themselves, this episode invites us to look more closely at the leveling system that these assessments, these state approved assessments, provide. So, what does Lexile actually measure? What does it not measure? And how should this information inform our decisions about the text we use, the tasks we ask children to perform, and our instruction? So, according to the Lexile framework for reading, they state that it's important to note that the Lexile measure of a book refers only to its text difficulty. A Lexile measure does not address the content or the quality of the book. So, a Lexile measure is based on two strong predictors of how difficult a text is: its word frequency and its sentence length. Lexile goes on to say that many other factors affect the relationship between a reader and a book, including its content, the age and interest of the reader, and the design of the actual book. And then continuing on the screen, the Lexile measure is a good starting point in the book selection process, but these other factors should be considered when making a decision about which book to choose. So let's use this information from Lexile and try to make sense of the tools we're required to use, understanding their role and their limitation, and then applying professional judgment related to the use of leveled texts. As we just discussed, Lexile provides useful quantitative information, but it's important to be clear about what it does not measure. Lexile does not account for qualitative elements of texts. Elements like meaning, text structure, language use, knowledge demands placed on the reader. Those qualitative features matter deeply when we think about how children actually experience a text. And because of that, Lexile is only one part of the story. This is where it's helpful to widen the lens. Many publishing companies rely on a broader set of text characteristics when designing and leveling books for children. So these characteristics do include the same two features that Lexile measures, which is sentence complexity and words or word frequency. But they also incorporate qualitative considerations that shape how a text feels, how it flows, and how it functions for the reader. These qualitative characteristics have guided the creation of highly engaging texts for children, books with compelling characters and meaningful topics, books with thoughtful progression across levels. They are the books that fill book rooms across the country and around the world, and they are texts that teachers have used intentionally for decades as a part of literacy instruction. They are also books that I have personally used to teach hundreds of children to read, not as replacements for complex grade level texts, but as instructional tools designed to support skill development, confidence, and independence. So, as we move forward, this conversation isn't about choosing one measure or another. It's about understanding what each measure captures and what it doesn't. So we can make informed professional decisions that align texts, readers, and our instructional purpose. It's critical to honor the tools educators use and make sense of them thoughtfully, always in service of children. Now, let's consider the third area of complexity that involves the reader and the task on this very busy screen. Okay, first, let's consider the reader in two ways. First, we must consider our readers' interests, their motivation, and their background knowledge when choosing or supporting texts. While we know that not every book we choose will be their favorite, we have to think about how our role in supporting their curiosity just enough so that they engage in a meaningful way is so important. Next, in a typical classroom of 20 students, let's say, research would suggest that about 5 to 6 will read below grade level, and about 8 to 10 will read on grade level, and 4 to 5 will read above grade level. So when we consider these readers and this kind of range of reading, we have to think about how instruction has to be flexible and how we need a range of materials to meet this range of readers. So now let's consider what we mean when we talk about the task or the task we are asking of readers. As you look at the graphic on the right, I want to invite you to think about degrees of difficulty of the tasks that we're asking and not levels. So at the center, represented in green, we see independent or easy reading. This is where students can read accurately, they can read fluently, and they can read with confidence on their own. This kind of reading matters. It builds stamina and identity and joy, but it's not where new learning is introduced. The small yellow ring around that green circle represents the zone of proximal development. And this ring is small for a reason. It's considered the instructional sweet spot. It's where the task is intentionally challenging, but the reader is supported. This is where productive challenges and guided practice lives. It's the we do it space. Students are not doing the work alone, but they are actively participating alongside a skilled teacher who is guiding attention, who's previewing vocabulary, who's supporting meaning and word solving. Structured literacy and balanced comprehensive responsive literacy agree that students achieve the end goal of comprehension when texts that they read are read above 90%. So this model takes that even further and to show that where the percentages guide us to an instructional sweet spot for reading growth is that when we read these texts between the students can read between 90 and 94% accurate. Beyond that, we see that outer red space. Texts are simply too hard without support. These texts aren't inappropriate. They just require the teacher to carry the reading work. This is where read alouds and even shared reading belong, where students can still engage with ideas and language and knowledge without the burden of decoding or that cognitive load. What this graphic helps us to remember is that effective instruction always considers both the reader and the task. The same text can be appropriate or not, depending on who the reader is and what we're asking them to do. So, growth doesn't come from making everything harder, it comes from placing challenge where instruction can help. Explicit instruction lives in this decision making space where we intentionally match the texts, the tasks, and support so students experience success, they experience productive challenge and meaning in the right measure. So let's simplify this conversation about leveled texts. We begin with universal and screening assessments, which provide us with a Lexile level, a quantitative measure that gives insight into the complexity of a student's reading ability based on sentence length and word frequency. That information is, according to Lexile, a good starting point, but it is incomplete on its own. So, to move from data to instruction, we then need to consider well written texts that include both quantitative and qualitative measures. Qualitative measures, which helps us understand how a text will actually function for a reader. This is where leveled texts with an expert teacher come together to support students in their zone of proximal development. When we bring these measures together, we're better positioned to make intentional decisions, not just about which text a student reads, but what the student is being asked to do with that text. Ultimately, effective instruction happens when we use assessment data to inform text selection, apply professional judgment to evaluate the text quality, and then thoughtfully match the reader with the task so challenge is placed where instruction can support growth. The text level gradient is designed to support teachers in assessment and instruction. It is not meant to be shared with children or used to define them. It is detrimental to a student's self-esteem and their love of reading when they're encouraged to measure their progress by moving up levels. What we need to understand about reading levels is one, Reading levels are instructional tools, not developmental endpoints. Levels can be useful for teachers to select text for instruction, to observe reading behaviors, to plan targeted support. However, educators must be extremely cautious not to label children by a level. Restricting access to text based solely on a level or treating level movement as a primary indicator of reading growth is not encouraged. Levels are meant to be tools for teacher decision making. 2, text complexity is multidimensional. So no single measure captures text complexity. Effective text selection considers, as we just examined, quantitative features, qualitative features, and reader and task variables. So reading levels typically reflect multiple text features, which is why they exist. However, they must be used alongside professional judgment, not in isolation. 3, limiting students to leveled texts can restrict growth. Students benefit from reading a wide range of texts, including easier texts, instructional texts, and complex texts with support. So an over-reliance on leveled reading can reduce exposure to vocabulary, to syntax, to ideas, especially for developing readers. So educators must have access to complexity through instruction, not waiting for students to level up independently. The fourth point here is that instruction matters even more than the level of a text. So teacher support, teacher modeling, teacher interaction have a greater impact on comprehension and growth than the text level in and of itself. The same text can be either accessible or inaccessible depending on its instructional context. And so this aligns with the idea that leveled text can support learning when used intentionally, but they are never a substitute for a range of complexity.
As we close this episode, it is important to acknowledge what we've been holding true throughout this conversation. There is real tension here. That tension exists, I believe, because literacy instruction is complex and because teachers who work in the field care deeply about getting it right. Differences exist, but the more we understand about the tools, about texts, about instructional purpose, the better we become. So ensuring that educators have access to a wide variety of resources and the professional knowledge to use those resources intentionally is paramount, because they are working with a range of learners in classrooms. So we need to trust teachers to use this range of tools to serve children. This has been a calm conversation, making sense of literacy without the noise.